Welcome to video lecture number 4 for chapter 11. This video is going to focus on blood clotting and disorders involved with platelets or blood clotting in general. Now remember that the medical term for platelets is thrombocytes, and the root thrombo means a clot or to clot. So just remember that, because that is going to be kind of a theme when we go through all of these disorders with blood clotting, is that thrombo root is going to come up again and again. Now, before we get into any actual disorders, we first need to talk about some medical terms for blood clotting. The term hemostasis means to control or to stop bleeding. Blood clots are a tool of hemostasis. Okay, if you just glance at this word, I usually hear students say that it looks a lot like homeostasis, which means maintaining a stable internal environment. The suffix stasis is the same between those two words, and it means to control or stop, but the roots are what differs between the two terms. So the root homeo of homeostasis means the same. So homeostasis is controlling the same, or in other words, keeping the same. Okay, and that's what homeostasis is. You're trying to maintain or keep a stable internal environment. So you're trying to keep the same water levels and oxygen levels and all of that. Now the root hemo in hemostasis means blood. So hemostasis is controlling blood, or in other words, controlling bleeding. Two other terms you will need to know are coagulation and coagulopathy. Now, both of these words share the root coagulo, which means clump, and the only difference is their suffixes. The suffix ation on coagulation means process, so coagulation means the process of clumping, or in other words, the process of forming a blood clot. The suffix pathy on coagulopathy means disease or disorder, so coagulopathy is a disorder of coagulation, or in other words, it's a disorder of blood clotting. So all of the following disorders that we're going to talk about are going to be classified as coagulopathies. The first coagulopathy that we are going to talk about is going to be hemophilia. Now, you might have heard of hemophilia in biology class before. It is a genetic disorder that causes an individual who has hemophilia to have a deficiency in what we call a coagulation factor. Now, coagulation factors are proteins and enzymes that initiate the process of clotting the blood, so they're what start the process off. So therefore, if these individuals don't have the mechanism to start the blood clotting process in general, their body cannot form blood clots. Okay, if no one is at the race, the 5K, to say go, no one's going to run the race, right? If you don't have those proteins and enzymes that say we need to form a blood clot, let's start forming the blood clot, you're not going to form a blood clot. Now what happens after that is, if an individual were to have a cut or have some sort of internal bleeding, like what happens when you just simply like run into a table, or if you get hit by something that would usually cause a bruise, they would continue to bleed, and they run the risk of possibly bleeding out due to maybe just running into a table. So their body is unable to stop that bleeding completely, which leads to blood accumulating in their skin, their joints, their muscles, which can be really quite painful. And again, like I said, that these individuals can die due to this disorder if the cut or the internal bleeding is bad enough, or if they don't seek medical attention that they need. The next blood clotting disorder we are going to discuss is thrombosis. Now, thrombosis itself is not a disorder. Thrombosis is just the formation of a clot, And the scientific or medical term for clot is a thrombus. So thrombosis is the formation of a thrombus, which is a blood clot. Now, the disorder, the disease, or whatever you want to call it, that comes from thrombosis is if a part of the thrombus or the blood clot breaks off and begins to circulate the body via the bloodstream. Now, you probably recognize this, right? So if part of the blood clot breaks off, it is called an embolus. And if that part that breaks off gets stuck somewhere, like in the coronary artery or the cerebral artery, right, then that is known as an embolism, and that could cause a stroke, right, or a heart attack. So thrombosis is the formation of a clot. That's not really a disease or a disorder. It's just a natural process. But when you get down to part of that blood clot breaking off and traveling, that part that broke off is an embolus, and then it can cause an embolism, which I guess you can consider a disease or disorder in a sense. The next one we are going to talk about is thrombocytopenia. It looks like a scary word because it's long, but if we break it down, it's not so scary. And you know the parts of these words already. So the suffix penia means deficiency. The root thrombo means clot, and the other root cyto means cell. So thrombocytopenia is deficiency of clotting cells or a deficiency of platelets in the body. Now, this usually happens when the bone marrow is destroyed, either through some sort of radiation or chemotherapy, or if the individual has leukemia, which, remember, is when the bone marrow is producing an overabundance of white blood cells, so it cannot make as many red blood cells and platelets, which leads to a deficiency in both. Okay? And thrombocytopenia can cause something called petechiae to form, and that is the plural version of this word. Petechia is singular, petechiae is plural. Petechiae are small spots on your skin, so it's what's in that picture on the slide, due to hemorrhaging or bleeding in the capillaries. So there's all these kind of really small punctures in your capillaries due to something, and those capillaries are bleeding, and the blood that is getting taken out of the capillaries, that is what you see as those little red spots on that person's leg, and those are called petechiae, and they're really small. Okay, so remember that petechiae are small spots due to bleeding within this underneath the skin. Okay, so then similar to petechiae are purpuras. I hate this word, but it's a word. Purpuras, this is when you have a burst blood vessel, so probably something bigger than a capillary, so more blood is being released from that burst blood vessel. That is going to cause a purpura. So petechiae are small versions of purpuras, and purpuras are larger. So that top image would be a purpura. So if you were to burst like some artery maybe in your arm or your leg, obviously blood is going to rush out before the clot forms. And so when that blood is rushing out, that's why it looks rather red, it's going to form a purpura. Now, bruises or hematomas are the collection of that blood in the skin. Okay, so let's say that you're Miss Key and you run your quad into a desk at school for the 10th time this month, right? I'm always knocking into those stupid desks. So when I hit my leg against that desk, and if I hit it hard enough, it causes internal bleeding due to the bursting of some of my smaller blood vessels in the area. So like my capillaries in that area would burst due to me hitting that desk. Okay. Now because I didn't actually cut my skin on the desk, the blood that's coming out of these burst blood vessels is going to ooze into my skin tissues, and that would be called a purpura if there's enough internal bleeding, which usually there's not, it's a desk. Once that blood then settles into my tissues after the blood clots, right, that is what we know to be a bruise. Okay, so most of the time you will see a bruise. You don't often see a purpura, okay? This is the reason for the color difference between a purpura, which is usually very red, and a bruise, which is usually like a blue, black, purple color, okay? Purpuras are red because the bleeding is still going on, okay? So you're actually kind of seeing the internal bleeding through your skin, and it looks red. Bruises tend to be purple because the bleeding has stopped at that point and the blood is settling into the layers of your skin and tissue. Okay, so that's why then it looks purple. And then eventually the body is going to work to try and get rid of the blood that has accumulated in the tissues, and that is why your bruise then fades usually into like a gross yellow color, and then it goes completely away once all the blood has been taken out of your tissues. Okay, so petechiae are small blood spots, I guess you can call them. Purpuras are larger blood spots, and bruises are from the collection or the settling of that blood in your tissues. Okay, and that is going to be it for chapter 11.